After my hand was crushed in a factory accident, I lay alone in a hospital room at 3:00 a.m., waiting for my son and his wife. When they arrived, my daughter-in-law covered her nose and sneered. "The smell of grease blood in this old man is disgusting. You're 60 years old, useless, and still clinging to a dirty factory job." My son only asked about the compensation money. They left me there alone. I picked up my phone, called my lawyer, and said, "It's time I know the truth. I have worked the night shift at Allegheny Industrial Works for 35 years. 35 years of punching the same time clock, lacing up the same steel-toed boots, treading the same cracked concrete floors, under the same stuttering yellow lights. By the time most people in Philadelphia were sitting down to dinner, I was already deep inside that plant, checking pressure gauges, running diagnostics on the hydraulic press units, while the city beyond those walls went dark and still. People always asked me how I stood it. The noise, the heat, the grease that worked itself so far into your skin, it never fully scrubbed clean, no matter how long you stood at that sink. Welcome to Grandpa's Revenge. I'm glad you found your way here today. If these stories speak to you, tap that subscribe button so the next one comes your way without you having to go looking for it. Before we get into today's story, I'd like to ask you something. When you sit down with a story like this one, what are you hoping to carry away from it? Is it comfort or clarity, or maybe just the reminder that it's possible to hold your ground and still keep your dignity? Drop your answer in the comments. I read them. Now, a quick note, some elements of this story have been shaped for audio storytelling, and any resemblance to specific real people or events is coincidental. What matters is the truth at the center of it. And I meant it. I never resented a single hour. There is a dignity baked into physical labor that no corner office or portfolio of investments can touch. My hands showed it rough, marked up the knuckles, permanently darkened, and I carried those marks like a kind of currency. That Friday in early November, I had no business being on that floor at all. A kid named Kelsey, 24 years old, not even a full year into the job, had phoned out sick with a stomach bug. The shift supervisor sent a message down the chain, looking for someone to fill in. I had nothing pulling me home. The house had been the kind of still that settles in and stays 3 years of it ever since Lorraine died. I shot back a reply, "I'll take it." That put me on machine number 4, a 15-ton hydraulic press used for stamping structural beam sections. 35 years of running that equipment meant I could read it the way some men read weather. I knew the small shudder it made on the downstroke when the fluid hadn't warmed up, yet knew the high-pitched whine the pressure relief valve threw off when it was straining. So at 11:14 that night, when something shifted in the machine's rhythm, I caught it immediately. Nothing violent about it. No bang, no shriek, just a beat that landed wrong like a clock that ticks and then hesitates. The automatic cycle had a pulse to it, and that pulse had stuttered. I moved toward the control panel and bent close to read the sensor display. The emergency stop indicator, designed to cut power the instant anything entered the press zone, was cycling between green and yellow, restless when it had no reason to be anything but solid green. "What in the world are you doing?" I said under my breath, and reached up to knock the panel casing with my knuckle. A loose connection from vibration, old floor trick, nothing in the safety manual, but it usually worked. The machine didn't wait for it to work. I have no reliable account of the next few seconds. What I can tell you is that the press came to it not on my command, not on schedule, entirely on its own terms. My left hand was still inside the zone. The sound it made is with me still, a compact, brutal crack I registered in my bones before my ears caught it traveling from my palm up my arm and lodging somewhere in my sternum. The pain that followed was total, bright, and consuming, like a spike driven straight through the hand. A scream came out of me, the kind I hadn't produced since childhood. It bounced off the steel walls before I could swallow it. I heard footsteps hammering across the concrete toward me almost immediately. "Miller, talk to me." Dario got there first, throwing his forearm into the emergency shutoff. "Oh God, somebody call 911 right now." I made myself look down. I won't go into what I saw. What I'll say is that the glove had been torn open, and the state of my index finger was bad enough that Dario turned his face away. "Don't look at it," he said, and his voice had gone thin. "Vernon, keep your eyes on me. Don't look at it." 8 minutes for the ambulance. I know that, because I timed it in my head. When the mind starts drifting toward a place you can't afford to go, you anchor it to numbers, ceiling tiles, light fixtures. The number of times the paramedic said my name while she wrapped my hand, 11. Riding in the back of that ambulance through the empty Philadelphia streets toward Mercy General Medical Center, what came to me was this: I was 62 years old, flat on a stretcher, and not one person on earth knew where I was, unless I reached out to tell them. My right hand found the phone. My fingers were shaking badly enough that I fumbled the unlock twice. I went to the name I had always dialed first when something broke down, the one I'd turned to without thinking for 30 years, before Lorraine's illness changed everything. Devin. My son, 32 years old, a financial analyst at some downtown firm, at least according to what he told people over dinner. Tailored suits, drove a Lexus, and somewhere in his late 20s had quietly retired the word dad. Among his professional circle started calling me Vernon instead, as if the other word attached something to him he'd rather not carry. The line rang once, twice. By the third ring, I had my bandaged hand pressed to my chest, and I was praying honestly, praying the way Lorraine used to, eyes shut, jaw clenched, that he'd pick up. Fourth ring, he did. Dad. Sleep-heavy voice, rough at the edges, and already underneath it, even before he knew anything, a current of irritation. It's 2:00 in the morning. What do you want? My throat had closed down so tight the words came out like I was pushing them through gravel. Devin. I stopped, drew a breath, and started over. Son, I'm in an ambulance. There was an accident at the plant. My hand. It's bad. They're taking me to Mercy General. Silence on the line. 3 full seconds of it. In that silence, I learned more than I would have from anything he could have said. It wasn't the pause of someone absorbing a shock. It was the pause of someone running numbers. Okay, Devin said at last. All the grogginess had cleared out of his voice, replaced by something flat and deliberate. Okay, Dad, we'll sort it out. Which hospital? Mercy General, Devin, I don't know yet how serious. Got it, Mercy General. A beat. I'll make some calls. The line went dead before I could add a single word. The paramedic Greta, according to her name tag, turned her head toward me from up front. Her eyes were the kind that have absorbed a great deal without becoming hard. Anyone coming? I looked at the phone sitting in my palm. Through the rear window, the Philadelphia streetlights stretched and blurred as the city rolled past, dark and unbothered. He said he'd make some calls, I told her. Greta gave a small nod and faced the road again. She left it at that, but the line of her jaw went tight just briefly, the way it does when a person hears something that says far more than the words. I lay there with my bandaged hand against my chest and my eyes on the ambulance ceiling, turning over the same thought after 32 years. After all of it, I genuinely did not know what Devin would do when the moment came. I still had the capacity to be caught off guard by my own son. I shouldn't have. They had me in a prep bay by 2:30. Dr. Hartwick compact. No nonsense, the look of a woman who'd been running on less sleep than she should for longer than she'd admit. Examined the hand under the bay lights and gave it to me. Plain crush injury to the index finger. Bone fragmentation, possible nerve involvement. Surgery is what we need, Mr. Calloway. We require a signed consent form before we can move forward. Her eyes came up. Family on the way. My son said he was coming. Something shifted in her expression. Not pity exactly, not skepticism exactly. The particular look of a doctor who has spent enough late nights in emergency bays to know the gap between people who show up and people who intend to. She stripped off her gloves and walked out, leaving me to wait. Around 3:00, they brought something for the pain. It didn't knock me out, took the edge off and left me in a soft, half-detached state where the sounds of the ER seemed to reach me from a slight distance. Monitors cycling rubber soles, squeaking past the curtain, a television murmuring somewhere down the corridor. I kept my gaze on the ceiling and worked at not letting my mind go back to the machine, back to that sound. At 3:52, I heard heels. Not the soft, sensible footwear of the nursing staff, something else entirely. Deliberate, hard. Each step landing with the confidence of someone who had never once considered toning themselves down for a room. A voice trailed in behind them, low but not hushed. Devin, I swear to God this smell has already gotten into my coat. My heart monitor ticked up 8 beats in 4 seconds. I watched the number climb and understood somewhere at a remove that my own body had seen this coming. Devin stepped through the curtain. 32 years old, dark slacks, gray blazer, like he'd rerouted from something else entirely. Hair neat calfskin, Oxford shoes on his feet, the kind that had cost more than my entire first week's pay at the plant. He took in the room. The bed, the bandaging, the IV, the monitors, and his face did not give me concern. It gave me assessment. Dad. He stood just inside the curtain, no closer, not within reach. Plant told me it was a mechanical failure. What happened exactly? Safety sensor on press 4 gave out, I said. Press cycled with my hand still in the zone. 2 points of bone fragmentation, possibly more. He gave a slow nod, his gaze drifting to the monitor readings on the wall. Not to my face, to the numbers. Tara came in behind him. Dove-gray wool coat designer bag held in front of her like a shield. The instant she crossed into the bay, her whole body recoiled, not from concern, but from disgust, the full-throated flinch of someone who has walked into something they regard as beneath them. "Oh, for the love of God," she said loud enough that the young nurse at the station outside the curtain snapped her head up. "The grease and blood smell in here is absolutely nauseating. Devin, I told you he has plant insurance. That is exactly what it is for." The pain in my hand pulsed hard up to my shoulder. I breathed through it. "Tara," Devin said. A warning, not an apology. "Because I'm saying what's true," she replied, her voice holding steady at full volume. Her eyes moved across the bay with barely concealed scorn. 60 years old running manual press equipment? Honestly, Vernon, you could have retired 2 years ago. "His name is Dad," I said. Quiet, each word landing with deliberate weight. She inspected the cuff of her coat for stains and said nothing. Luz, the young nurse, 22, at most, stepped into the bay to check my IV line. Her eyes traveled from Devin to Tara to me, and for just a beat, something unguarded moved across her face. She hadn't yet built the walls that keep that kind of thing invisible. I was glad for that. "Dr. Hartwick needs the consent form signed before she can proceed," Luz said to Devin, her voice carefully even. Devin cleared his throat. "That's actually what I need to discuss with you, Dad." He laced his fingers together, a gesture I recognized from when he was 12, standing in front of something broken, working up to his explanation. Except, the look behind it now wasn't guilt. It was math. When there's a workplace injury, there's a workers' comp process. The plant carries liability coverage. We've already spoken with someone about making sure that compensation ends up where it belongs. So, before you put your signature on anything hospital paperwork, anything from the plant, we need you to hold off and let us handle it. The words hit like something solid. I looked at my son, the blazer, the polished shoes, the careful blankness sitting behind his eyes, and felt something give way inside me that had been holding since the ambulance, through the prep bay, through all of it. "Devin!" My voice shook for the first time since the accident. Not from the pain, from something that lived much deeper than pain. "I am lying in a hospital bed, my hand is in pieces, and you walked in here to talk to me about compensation paperwork." His jaw went tight. "We're trying to help. Get out." The words came out low and settled the way a heavy door shuts against cold air. Final no gap left. "Both of you, go home." "Dad, just listen." I said go home, Devin. I turned my face up toward the ceiling because I couldn't look at him anymore without feeling things I wasn't equipped to feel in a hospital room at 4 a.m. "I'll handle the paperwork myself." He stood there for a moment. I could sense him the way you sense a draft, not warmth, just the presence of something absent. Then his footsteps crossed toward the curtain. Tara's heels clicked after him, sharp and retreating down the linoleum hallway. Luce drew the curtain shut. She tended to my IV line without speaking. But before she slipped out, she set her hand briefly on the bed rail. Not on my arm, just the cold metal bar close enough to mean something. "I'll get Dr. Hartwick," she said quietly. "We'll take care of you, Mr. Calloway." I nodded. Above the curtain rod, the small red light of the security camera pulsed on and off in its steady, unhurried way. I stared at it until the edges of my vision softened, and I made myself a promise, quiet, deliberate. The kind you make when you know you'll need to draw on it later. I was going to hold on to everything that had happened in this room tonight. Every word, every heel click, every number Devin's eyes had tracked to, instead of my face. All of it. Devin came back alone. He appeared at the gap in the curtain, roughly 10 minutes after Tara's heels had carried her off down the hall. This time, without the blazer swagger, without the practiced composure. His jaw was set hard, and his eyes had the look of a man who'd gone outside to get himself together and hadn't fully managed it. "Dad," he gripped the curtain edge, "I need you to hear me out." "I'm listening," I said. My bandaged hand ached against the mattress. I kept my voice level because 35 years of working alongside dangerous machinery had taught me that the moments demanding the most steadiness were always the ones where steadiness felt least available. "We've retained a lawyer," Devin said, "about the accident, about everything that follows from it. Before you put your name on a single document, hospital consent plant paperwork, anything, it has to come through us first. The workers' comp payout from Allegheny Industrial Works could be substantial, and if you start signing things without seeing the whole picture, you could walk away with a fraction of what you're owed." I studied my son for a long moment, the careful phrasing. The word "we" meaning himself and Tara. The phrase "come through us" meaning through their hands before it ever reached mine. "Devin," I said, and my voice split down the middle like old wood. "You are standing in a hospital room at 4 a.m, telling your father, lying here with a crushed hand, not to sign his own medical consent form so that you can control his compensation money." His face went red from the collar up. "That is not what I—" "Then say what you mean." My right hand gripped the bed rail until the metal dug into my palm. "Look at me and say exactly what you mean." Devin opened his mouth. His throat worked. He looked at the monitor, at the IV line, at the floor, anywhere but my face. And in that long, hollow moment, I understood something with a terrible kind of clarity. He couldn't say what he meant, because saying it plainly would require him to name what it was. "Just don't sign anything tonight," he said at last, barely above a whisper. Then he turned and walked out through the curtain without looking back. Luz returned within minutes, moving with the quiet purpose of someone who had been nearby enough to hear and had decided to answer with action instead of words. She checked my IV and told me Dr. Hartwick had arranged for a hospital patient advocate to witness the consent form standard procedure, she said, for patients without available family support. Her voice stayed professionally neutral, but something in her eyes was burning that she was too young to fully tamp down. "Thank you," I told her. She gave a small nod. "We take care of our patients here, Mr. Calloway." They took me into surgery at 5:40 in the morning. I came out with my index finger stabilized in a soft, cast a low, roaring ache the medication kept just shy of unbearable, and a fatigue so complete it felt structural, like something weight-bearing inside me had been ground down. I slept in the recovery room until nearly 11:00. When I woke, thin November, light was pressing through the narrow ceiling window, like a reluctant attempt at morning. By 1:00, I was sitting in the discharge waiting area, same work clothes from the shift before, left arm in a sling, a manila envelope of aftercare instructions tucked under my right. My phone showed 2 missed calls from Devin, and one from a number I didn't have saved. I put it back in my pocket without returning any of them. I sat with my right hand resting on my knee, watching the automatic doors slide open and shut as people moved in and out. My mind went to something Sylvia had said once, 2 Christmases back at her father's retirement dinner, almost to herself, not quite directed at me. "If you ever need anything, Mr. Calloway, my door's always open." I had thanked her and let it pass. I wasn't letting it pass now. I found her name and pressed call. She picked up before the second ring ended. "Mr. Calloway." Measured calm, entirely unsurprised, as though she had been at her desk waiting for precisely this call and had only been uncertain of the hour. "Are you all right? I've had better mornings." I said, my voice scraped down to just the truth. Devin was at the hospital. First thing out of his mouth was about getting control of my workers' comp money before I'd even signed the consent form. Sylvia. "I see." A brief pause, purposeful. "Are you still at Mercy General Discharge waiting area?" "Head straight to my office," she said. The steadiness in her voice hadn't moved an inch, but something underneath it had sharpened a precision, a readiness like a tool that's been picked up and is already in use. 5th Avenue, 14th floor, cab only, no stops. The band around my chest eased not all the way, but enough to let me breathe. "Sylvia, I don't want to drag you into Mr. Calloway." Just my name, and a tone that closed the door on any argument. 15 years ago, you went back into a burning storage room and carried my father out on your shoulders when every alarm in that building was going off and the floor had already emptied. He was 63 years old. He wasn't getting out of there on his own. Something real moved beneath the evenness of her voice, something she had held in careful reserve for a long time, and was only now letting find its shape. "I've owed you a chance to make that right for 15 years. Don't take it from me." 4 minutes later, a cab was at the curb. I eased into the back seat, tucked my slung arm against my body, and let Philadelphia unspool past the window. Bare trees, gray, November sky, brick storefronts wearing the flat-shuttered look of a city that has quit pretending warmth is coming. The elevator opened on 14, and Sylvia was already standing in the corridor. Dark blazer, her father's directness in her eyes, the kind of gaze that takes in everything and flinches at nothing. She registered the sling, the work clothes, the particular exhaustion that gets ground into a face during a long, bad night, and she said nothing soft about any of it. She knew the way her father always knew that softness wasn't the instrument this moment required. "Come in," she said, moving aside. "We have a lot of ground to cover." The conference table held a folder, thick color tabbed, already laid open under the overhead light. The sight of it closed my throat. Not fear. Something harder to name, the humbling shock of realizing someone had been keeping watch over you at the exact moment you didn't know you needed watching. I took the chair across from her and sat. She turned the folder's first page toward me. A photograph. My son standing at the gate of Allegheny Industrial Works. 11 o'clock at night. Timestamp burned clean and sharp into the lower corner. 3 days before the accident. The bottom fell out of my stomach. "Talk to me," I said. "And that photo," I said, my voice was barely keeping its footing, "was shot 3 days before I got hurt." 3 days, Sylvia said, confirming it without blinking. Her hands rested flat on the folder. Devin was at the plant entrance at 11:07 on a Tuesday night. That timestamp comes from the security camera in the parking lot across the street. A dry cleaner exterior camera runs around the clock. 30-day retention on their footage. I requested the copy 2 weeks ago. My right hand had locked around the table's edge, knuckles draining white. I unclenched my fingers, deliberately pulled in a breath, tried to settle my pulse. "You've been watching him." "I've been paying attention," Sylvia said. "Those aren't the same thing. One is suspicion, the other is care." She drew the folder closed. "Well, Vernon, I need you somewhere other than your own home for the next few days. Not because anything threatens you, because I want Devin to move freely without any sense that he's being observed. Is there somewhere you can go?" "My neighbor Hank," I said. "He's not someone who asks a lot of questions." "Then go there tonight. That's exactly what we need." Hank Pruitt had been my neighbor for going on 19 years, 2 doors down, retired pipe fitter widower. Words were something he rationed, the way a careful man rations anything valuable measured out, never wasted, never more than the job required. That evening I showed up at his door with an overnight bag in my good hand, and a thin story about the doctor wanting me out of the house while someone looked at the heating. He stepped back, pointed toward the hallway, and said, "Pot of beef stew on the stove, help yourself." That was it. No follow-up, no look that asked what I wasn't saying. I could have broken down from the plain, uncalculating decency of it. Sleep didn't come. I lay on my back in Hank's spare room, watching the water stain on the ceiling and turning the same image over and over: my son, outside a plant he hadn't set foot near in years. At 11 at night, 72 hours before a machine failed, in a way machines aren't supposed to fail. Monday morning. Boss 4:47. Sylvia's name lit up my phone. He filed. Her voice had that specific flatness, the tone of a person who saw something coming, was proven correct, and wishes they hadn't been. Devin's attorney walked a guardianship motion into the Allegheny County Court of Common Pleas at 9 o'clock this morning. The argument is that your injury has left you temporarily unable to manage your own affairs, and that your financial assets need court-supervised oversight while you recover. The pain in my hand kicked hard the instant she said it, as if the body understands insults the mind is still processing. He told a court, "I'm not fit to handle my own money." "Technically, the filing says you may need assistance," Sylvia said. "The legal distinction exists. The practical goal he's aiming for is the same." She paused. "His attorney also subpoenaed your bank records this morning. Standard move when you're seeking guardianship, establishes what's actually at stake." "When do you need me there?" "Now," she said. "Come straight in." I was through the door before 10. Sylvia was waiting in the corridor, one printed page in her hand. She didn't pass it to me right away. She studied my face, first doing the quiet calculation a doctor runs. Is this person ready for what I'm about to show them? And then she extended it. Keystone Federal Savings. My account. Balance 0 Jews. Final transaction. A complete wire transfer of the full balance executed 2 days before my accident. $300,000. Vanished. My legs buckled. I got a palm against the wall and held myself there while my heart hammered, and that number on the page took apart every assumption I'd been standing on. Where did it go? I got the words out. Into a trust, Sylvia said, steering me into the conference room, setting the page flat between us. Established under Pennsylvania Revised Code, Section 5801. My name is trustee, yours is sole beneficiary. Under Pennsylvania trust law, that structure is airtight, no third-party freeze order touches it, no guardianship petition reaches it, no creditor gets near it. Devon's attorney pulled your bank records this morning and found a zero balance. There is nothing there to petition, nothing to seize. Mounting a probate challenge would cost them the better part of a year and more in fees than the math would ever justify. I looked at the statement for a long moment. I signed those documents 3 weeks before the accident, Sylvia said. You phoned me and told me something felt wrong with Devon, that whatever happened, you wanted your savings behind a wall. I drafted the trust under OC 5801. We signed on a Thursday afternoon, a small movement at the corner of her mouth. You told me I was overcomplicating everything. And the wire transfer, 2 days before you were hurt. The trust was already standing, moving the money into. It was simply the last lock on the door turned before Devon ever thought to reach for the handle. Why didn't I tell anyone? I said. The last word cracked open on its way out, releasing something I'd kept pressed down since the ambulance, not grief exactly, but the full dizzying weight of how close I'd come to having nothing underneath me. Sylvia, I put my good hand flat on the table. He stood in front of a judge and said his own father couldn't look after himself. Yes, she said quietly, he did, and the account he's trying to freeze has held nothing for 2 days now. Since that Thursday, she confirmed. Devon's attorney rang my office at 9:45 this morning, wanting an emergency sit-down. I let them know my schedule was closed through Friday. Something gave way in my chest, raw, involuntary, neither laugh nor cry, but the pressurized thing that lives between them, which I barely managed to swallow before it broke the surface. I pressed the heel of my hand over my eyes. Breathed. There's more, Sylvia said. She lifted a second folder from beside the first and set it open on the table. What's in here is going to reframe everything you think you understand about how your hand got hurt. She looked straight at me unhurried. Are you ready for this? I dropped my hand from my face, squared my shoulders, met her eyes. Yes, I said. Every bit of it. Clifford Monroe came into Sylvia's office on Wednesday morning, lugging a briefcase that had outlived its best years, carrying himself with the measured, professional courtesy of a man who had long since trained himself to speak as though a transcript was being kept. He was the workers' compensation claim investigator, assigned by Allegheny Industrial Works' insurance carrier, a role he had held for 22 years. He told us, lowering himself into the chair across the table with the unhurried ease of a man completely at home in rooms like this one. Mid-50s gray threading through his temples, a navy-striped tie that was slightly too short. He placed a manila folder on the table, laid his hands over it, and looked at me. Mr. Calloway, I appreciate you making the time. This is a standard investigative interview. We run one on every workplace injury claim above a certain threshold. I have some questions about the sequence of events the night of the accident, and then we'll go through the machinery documentation. He glanced towards Sylvia. Your attorney is welcome to stay. She stays, I said. Of course. He opened the folder. Walk me through your shift assignment that evening. We went through it methodically. I laid out the whole night covering for Kelsey, the behavior of the machine, the moment I noticed something was off, the accident to the emergency response. Monroe listened without breaking in, logging notes in a small wire-bound notebook, with a mechanical pencil nodding here and there. He was skilled at this. His face was a closed door. When I finished, he studied his notes briefly. He asked about the maintenance history on machine number 4, then about my certification on hydraulic press equipment. Sylvia fielded several of those with documentation she had already assembled. Then Monroe turned to a page in his folder, held his eyes on it a half-beat longer than he'd given any of the others, and said in the same level tone he'd used throughout, Mr. Calloway, there's something that surfaced during preliminary review that I'm obligated to bring to your attention. It's standard for us to flag any contact with our office that predates the filing of a claim. My spine went rigid. Something in the wording, the clinical care of it, sent every nerve in my body to attention. 3 days before your accident, Monroe continued, our office received a phone call. The caller identified himself as your son, Devon Calloway. He said he was calling on your behalf and asked a series of specific questions, the standard payout timeline for workers' compensation, hand injury claims in Pennsylvania. The the process for naming a family member as the compensation recipient, and whether a family member could manage claim disbursement in the event the injured worker was incapacitated. The room didn't move, but something inside my chest did a violent sideways lurch that made me lock both hands onto the armrests to keep from pitching forward. "He called," I said, barely audible, "3 days before." "The call was logged as a routine inquiry," Monroe said. "We receive calls from family members fairly regularly in anticipation of potential claims. It was only when this claim came through that the date on that log triggered a review." He looked at me with the steady, neutral expression of a man who had spent 2 decades delivering hard information without editorializing. "I wanted you to know." Sylvia's voice came in from my right, measured and exact. "Mr. Monroe, would you be able to furnish a certified copy of that call log for our records date time and the noted content of the inquiry?" "I can have it to your office by tomorrow morning," he said. "Thank you." Sylvia made a note. "And the call was, it recorded. All calls to our inquiry line are recorded for quality assurance." Monroe looked between us. "I'd need a formal legal request for the audio itself. The log summary comes as standard documentation." "We'll submit the request today," Sylvia said. Monroe wrapped up the interview 15 minutes later, shook our hands, and headed out with his short tie and his worn briefcase. The moment the outer door closed, I turned to face Sylvia. My hands were shaking against the armrests, not from cold, not from the injury, but from what a body does when it has taken in something too enormous to quietly absorb. "He called the insurance company," I said, and my voice split down the center. 3 days before the accident, he was asking how to collect my compensation money if I couldn't do it myself. I pressed my good hand flat to my sternum, felt my own heartbeat running too fast beneath it. "Sylvia, he was planning for me to get hurt. He was planning for a claim to be filed," she said carefully, precisely drawing the line, exactly where the law would draw it. "Whether he anticipated the specific nature of your injury, we can't say yet, but that phone call establishes that he intended to benefit financially from your workplace accident before the accident occurred." She had her laptop open already. "I'm submitting the formal request for the recording right now." I couldn't stay in the chair. I got up and crossed to the window because there was something moving through me that needed somewhere to go. A grief so vast and so cold it didn't feel like grief at first. It felt like weather, like something that had been building out on the horizon for years and had finally made landfall. I looked down at 5th Avenue 14 floors below. Pedestrians on the sidewalks, traffic crawling, a food cart on the corner, sending up a thin ribbon of steam. My son had phoned an insurance company 3 days before a machine broke my hand. 3 days before, I was flat on a stretcher calling his name. "Vernon." Sylvia's voice came quietly from behind me. "We have 2 pieces now. The photograph and the phone call. The dates align. The intent is in the record." She paused. "I told you there was a 3rd piece. I'm still pulling it together, but I need you to understand, when it arrives, it's the piece that makes everything else impossible to explain away." I turned from the window. My eyes were burning, not with tears, not yet, but with the dry, ferocious heat of a man holding something back through sheer force of will. "How long?" I asked. "A few more days," she said. "Can you hold on that long?" I looked down at my left hand in its soft cast. Thought about 35 years of night shifts. Thought about the sound the press had made. "I've been holding on my whole life," I said. "A few more days is nothing." Sylvia called me Thursday evening at 6:15. "The technician finished the extraction," she said, and her voice carried something different from every other call that week. Tighter, more deliberate. The quality of a person, keeping careful distance from what they're about to hand over. "The dash cam footage from your truck. He was able to recover the audio files going back 40 days. A pause. "Vernon, I need you to hear something alone before we talk about it. Not here, not over the phone, in your truck." "Why my truck?" "Because some things are better heard in the place where they happened. I'll leave a USB drive at the front desk downstairs. Pick it up tonight. Listen to the file dated the morning of your accident, specifically the segment between 1:40 and 2:00. A shorter pause. "Then call me, regardless of the hour." I picked up the drive at 6:40, a small thing no bigger than my thumbnail in a small craft paper envelope with my name written on it in Sylvia's precise hand. I sat in the parking garage a moment just holding it. Then I drove to the empty lot behind the old Westinghouse building on West Liberty Avenue where I used to eat lunch in my truck during my first years at the plant 35 years back. Back when everything still fit inside a sandwich break. I parked, cut the engine, plugged the drive into the USB adapter Sylvia had included, connected it to my phone, and opened the file. 1:45 a.m., the morning of the accident. I pressed play. The first few seconds held only road noise, the low, specific hum of a vehicle working through empty city streets before dawn, tires on wet asphalt, the occasional soft click of a distant traffic signal. The dash cam's microphone was sensitive. It had caught everything. Then Tara's voice. Devin. Sharp. Impatient. I'm being serious right now. Why are we even doing this? Devin's voice from the driver's seat. Because the plant called. We had to respond. We didn't have to do anything. Her voice climbed edged with a petulance that turned my stomach. He has insurance through the plant. That's what it's there for. Which means we are not his emergency contacts. We are not his nurses. And I am not spending my Thursday night crossing Philadelphia because your father can't keep his hands clear of a machine. A brief sound from Devin. Not agreement, not pushback. Something in between. Devin. Tara's voice dropped lower, but the microphone caught every syllable with awful precision. I'm going to say something, and I need you to actually hear me. Why don't we just leave him? Let the old man bleed out in that parking lot. Save us the trouble of dealing with him later. The recording went dead. My hand was shaking so hard, the phone threatened to slide right off the console. I clamped it between both hands, the right one solid, the left sealed in its cast, and pinned them against my thighs. Engine off, Philadelphia utterly silent outside the glass, and those words sitting in the cab with me, like something that had mass and weight. Let the old man bleed out. These hands had built things. Midwinter furnace calls, so a family wouldn't wake up to frozen pipes. 15 straight years without turning down a single overtime shift, so Devin could walk into a university I'd never once had occasion to enter. 11 days parked in a chair beside my wife's hospital bed, not once stepping out, her hand in mine at the end. The drive home, alone. Back on the job that Monday, because I had no other model for how a man conducts himself. And now, my daughter-in-law had sat in the passenger seat of my truck and proposed letting me bleed out in a parking lot. I forced myself to hit play. Devin's voice. 3 seconds of road noise rolling ahead of it. Then, let's just see what the insurance situation looks like first. That was the entire answer. The recording rolled on a turn signal, the low concrete rumble of a hospital garage. I laid the phone face down on the seat beside me, covered both eyes with my palms, and pulled air in through my mouth in long, measured draws. The discipline I'd learned on the plant floor when something went bad and you could not let the panic in. My chest kept rising and falling too fast. Something scorched the back of my throat, and I would not let it become noise. Let the old man bleed out. And what Devin had offered in reply, let's see what the insurance situation looks like first. No recoil, no, you can't say that. No, that's my father you're talking about. Just let's see what the insurance situation looks like. 40 minutes, I sat there, maybe longer. Clouds dragged across a moon I could barely make out through the November overcast, and the light they let through shifted on the rainwater pooled in the cracked lot. I kept thinking about Lorraine, what she'd have said, what she'd have done, whether she'd have wept or whether she'd have arrived at the same place I was now, somewhere so far on the other side of grief that it had curdled into a cold, exhausted kind of knowing. My hands were steady by the time I reached for the phone. I found Sylvia's name and pressed it. 1 ring. I heard it, I said. The voice that came out of me had been scraped clean, no warmth left in the frame, like a house after the movers have gone. All of it. Sylvia, I'm all right, I said before the question could form on her end. I'm not all right, but I'll get there. Outside the windshield, the Philadelphia sky pressed down dark and low. I have everything we need for phase 1. A short pause on her end. When she answered, the steadiness in her voice was something I hadn't heard from her in days certain grounded warm. Then it's time to move to phase 2, she said. I picked up the Lexus by sound before I ever laid eyes on it. Without even seeing the car, I'd have known Devin was on his way. There's a particular texture to silence when something hard is incoming. 35 years alongside dangerous equipment teaches you that a kind of atmospheric tightening. I was at Hank's kitchen table, working through a cup of coffee, when I had heard that engine turn into my driveway 2 houses down. I set the mug down and told Hank, who had the newspaper open in front of him, that I needed to step back to my place for a while. Hank didn't look up from the page. "Stool keep," he said. Devin was up on my front porch by the time I reached the walk. He'd dressed for the weekend in his usual calculated way, khakis with a crease in them, a jacket that ran more than my monthly truck note hair, arranged with the care of someone who has never accidentally thrown on whatever was closest. Standing next to him, gripping his hand with both of hers, and swaying the gentle, aimless way children sway when they've got nothing pressing to do and nowhere in particular to be, was Caleb, my grandson, 5 years old. Those dark eyes catching the flat November light. He had on a blue puffy coat with a small iron-on patch on the right sleeve that was already starting to peel. The second he picked me out, Caleb dropped his father's hand and came at me full speed. Grandpa, he hit my legs with enough force that I had to snag the porch railing with my good hand to stay upright. Then he was craning his neck all the way back, one finger leveled at my soft cast eyes, wide as I'd ever seen them. "What happened to your hand? Does it hurt? Can I touch it?" "Easy, buddy." I got down to his level, my knees registering their displeasure, and held still, while he went over the cast with a kind of careful, almost ceremonial touch you'd use on something fragile. "It's on the mend. Don't squeeze it, I won't squeeze." He'd gone completely solemn about the whole business. Brow creased, 2 fingertips tapping the edge of the cast in small, deliberate pats, imitating something he'd absorbed from a medical show. "Grandpa does it feel like fire. Tommy at school broke his arm, and Tommy said it felt like fire. Something like that, I told him. The ache in my chest at that moment had nothing to do with the injury. Devin." I rose to my feet and looked across the top of Caleb's head at my son. This is a surprise. Devin's jaw held that particular set, the look of a man who has run his opening line enough times that he's locked into it. "We were in the neighborhood," he said. "Not true. My house sat at a solid 40 minutes from his in moving traffic, and Devin never made an unplanned trip. Just wanted to see how you're coming along." "That's thoughtful," I said, with enough of an edge that the word carried its opposite meaning. "Can we come in?" "Inside." Caleb peeled off toward the living room and launched into a thorough audit of every reachable surface, providing a running commentary in the bright, unself-conscious way of a 5-year-old who has never considered the possibility that anyone might not want to hear his findings. Devin took a chair at the kitchen table. I took the one across from him, no offer of coffee from either side. He produced a folded document from somewhere, set it between us, and nudged it across with 2 fingers, the practiced gesture of a man performing nonchalance. I let it sit there and looked at it. Deed transfer paperwork, my house. His name already keyed into the recipient line, formatted, waiting on a signature. "We've been thinking," Devin said, his delivery smooth, each word placed like he'd rehearsed this more than once. "Given the injury, the recovery window, what ongoing care could run financially, it makes more sense to title the property in our name. Tax efficiency, protection for you down the road." He inclined slightly forward. "Dad, you're 62. Time to get serious about planning ahead." Something moved through me, then cold and direct crown to base of spine. "Planning ahead?" I said the words back to him. "We'd take care of it all. Taxes, upkeep, insurance. You stay right here. Your day-to-day doesn't change." He opened both hands flat on the table, the display of a man who believes he is being generous. "It's just the smarter arrangement on paper. Smarter for who I said." A small flicker behind his eyes. "For the family." Before anything else could come out of his mouth, Caleb appeared in the kitchen doorway, cheeks high with color, all energy. "Grandpa, can I get some water?" Dad didn't bring my bottle. "Sure you can." I pushed my chair back, and right then I caught it. Something had shifted in Caleb's face. The brightness was still there, but underneath it the skin had gone splotchy red, tracking upward from his collar toward his jaw. His breathing had a ragged edge it hadn't had a moment ago. "Caleb." I was standing before I'd finished the word. "How are you feeling, bud? Look at me, talk to me." "My throat feels funny," he said, the voice thinner, now stripped of its earlier confidence. He laid a hand against his sternum. "Like it's tight." "Devin." I said it sharp. "Does Caleb have any allergies? What did he eat this morning?" Devin was already up, the whole rehearsed performance dissolved, nothing left but the unguarded terror of a father watching his child's color change wrong. I don't know. "I don't think so." "Caleb, what did you have for breakfast?" "Peanut butter," Caleb said, his voice going smaller. "And something from a granola bar." I already had 911 dialing. 6 minutes. That's how long it took the ambulance to get there. I climbed in beside Caleb, and Devin trailed us the entire way to Mercy General Medical Center in the Lexus. I kept Caleb's small hand wrapped in my right and never stopped talking, steady, deliberate, unrelenting, the fire trucks flashing past the ambulance window, the paramedic stethoscope, anything at all that would hold his gaze on my face and keep his breathing from crossing a line we couldn't walk back from. The hospital team moved fast. They got epinephrine into him, and inside 40 minutes color was seeping back into his cheeks, and he was asking for apple juice and wanting to know if there was a TV somewhere in the building. The relief hit my legs like a current, and I sank into one of those hard plastic hallway chairs and covered my eyes with my good hand. Devin lowered himself into the seat next to mine. A long silence sat between us, and then he said, "Thank you for calling so fast." "He's my grandson," I told him, and the words landed flat and final, like something carved in stone, not up for debate. 30 minutes after that, the doctor came back and confirmed it. Caleb was stable, the medication had done its work. "His airway was open," she said. "Discharge in a few hours, barring anything unexpected." She took Devin through a standard set of follow-up questions. Caleb's allergy history, what he'd eaten that morning, prior reactions. Routine stuff. Then, almost as an afterthought, she mentioned that the nursing team had pulled a standard blood panel during intake. She passed the printed sheet to Devin and said something about cross-referencing family blood types for the allergy documentation, standard protocol in pediatric anaphylaxis cases. I watched Devin take that paper, watched him read it, watched something happen to his face that I had never once witnessed before. Not a flush, not a draining of color, but an erasure, as if everything that had been living behind his eyes had simply been cleared away, like a whiteboard swiped clean in a single pass. The doctor continued down the hall. Devin stayed rooted where he stood. He didn't look in my direction. Instead, he moved past my chair without a word, crossed to the window at the corridor's far end, and planted himself there back to the umbrum, both hands buried in his jacket pockets, his shoulders set like concrete. "Devin," I said, "what did she tell you?" He rotated his head just slightly, not enough to meet my eyes, just enough that I caught the sharp angle of his jaw. "Caleb's going to be fine," he said. "That's what matters right now." His fists were clenched inside those pockets, though, and his voice had gone hollow, in the way a man's voice goes when something has shifted beneath him, something load-bearing and private, something he wasn't close to ready to name out loud, and maybe never would be. 2 days out from the hospital, Sylvia rang me at Hank's place just after 11 at night. I hadn't gone to bed. Sleep had been a stranger since the accident. That evening I'd been parked in Hank's armchair with all the lights off, eyes on the street through the front window. The way old men sit when their thoughts won't stop grinding, and the kind of tired that quiets them hasn't come yet. When Sylvia's name lit up my phone at that hour, my stomach went cold before I even pressed answer. "Can you talk?" she said. "I'm awake," I told her. "What's going on?" "Tara was at your house tonight." Her tone was measured, clipped, but I could detect something strung tight beneath the surface, pulled nearly to its limit. "She was inside for 43 minutes. Vernon, we caught it all on the security camera, the one in your hallway, the one you let me put up before you went to stay at Hank's. You said it was overkill, remember?" I remembered. My grip tightened around the phone. She pressed on. "She had a key. Devin lifted a spare from your kitchen drawer at some point and apparently never gave it back." A beat of silence. "She had no idea the camera was there. What did she do in there?" It came out quieter than I expected, rougher, the voice of a man clamping down hard on something that wanted to get very large, very fast. "Let me take you through it," Sylvia said. "I'm going through the footage frame by frame right now." She entered through the back door at 11:14. Lights off the whole time. She navigated by her phone's flashlight. She started in the kitchen, every drawer, every cabinet, then moved to the bedroom. The nightstand, the closet shelf underneath the mattress. A short pause. I could hear her scrubbing through the recording. "She's not careless, Vernon. Nobody who came on a whim works like this. She had a specific target and she knew exactly how to hunt for it. She wanted money," I said. "Cash the deed, whatever she could convert." "That's how I read it too," Sylvia said. 6 minutes in the bedroom, then the living room. She went through the bookshelves and behind the television. Then she moved into the hallway. A longer pause this time. "Vernon?" She found the panel in the floor, near the linen closet. Something clenched hard inside my chest. The tin box. 22 years ago, I had built that compartment with my own hands during a week when Lorraine had gone to visit her sister in Philadelphia, and I'd used my vacation time to refinish the hallway floors. It wasn't elaborate, just a shallow recess under a section of boards I'd cut and reset so precisely that the seam disappeared entirely unless you already knew where to kneel and press until one board shifted under your palm. I'd originally stashed the tin box there to protect Lorraine's jewelry during a run of break-ins on the block. As years passed, it became a drawer for things I couldn't bring myself to explain to anyone. Old letters, a couple of photographs, and eventually everything I had accumulated that belonged to Devon. Those letters had begun arriving roughly 4 years back from collection agencies, from a casino in Wheeling, from a sports book running out of a P.O. box in Nevada. I'd pulled them from the mailbox on visits before Lorraine died, well before I understood what they added up to. I'd held on to them because no better option presented itself, and because I kept telling myself the right opening to confront Devon directly would surface on its own. It never did. "She got the box open," Sylvia said. "What did she take?" The question came out of me flat and controlled, even as the hand resting on my knee had knotted into a fist so tight the knuckles had gone white. "Nothing," Sylvia said, and then held a pause just long enough to reset the whole conversation. "She didn't take a single letter. She photographed every one of them on her phone, each one individually held close enough to read the text. Then she set the box back exactly as she'd found it, reseated the floor panel, and went out the back door at 11:57. A long breath moved out of me. Not relief, something thornier than relief. Tara had come through my house in the darkness and put her hands on the one thing capable of unraveling Devon completely. She'd made copies and walked away without leaving so much as a fingerprint out of place. She hadn't picked up a weapon, she had constructed one, and she'd left the original untouched so that no one would ever know it was gone. "She isn't just taking cues from him," I said slowly. "No," Sylvia said. "She never has been. She's running her own play, Vernon, completely independent from whatever Devon is doing. And I think whatever Devon learned in that consultation room, whatever that blood panel revealed, it pushed her schedule forward in a serious way." Beyond Hank's window, the street sat entirely still. One streetlight threw a pale yellow ring down onto the damp asphalt. I held my eyes on it, turning over the image of a woman working through my darkened house with nothing but a phone's glow, methodically photographing 37 letters written to my son. "She'll deploy those letters," I said, "against Devon the moment she decides the time is right." "Almost certainly," Sylvia said, "which means these two aren't coordinating anymore. They're each running a separate operation, and at some point, those two separate lines are going to cross, and when they do, it will be devastating for both of them." She gave that a moment of quiet. "It shifts our approach a little. The box has to stay exactly where it is. Leave it alone. Don't pull the single thing out of it. If Tara comes back and sees any sign it was touched after tonight, she'll understand the house was under surveillance and we hand away every advantage we have." "I had no intention of going near it," I said. "Good." I heard the faint scratch of her writing something down. "Try to get some rest, Vernon. Tomorrow I have something to put in front of you. Something that's been verified and confirmed. Something to do with the machine." My spine locked straight. Every nerve I had fired at once the way they used to on the plant floor, the instant an alarm cut through the noise when you had maybe half a second to decide which way to throw yourself. "The footage," I said, "from the plant floor camera. What I'm about to share changed the shape of everything that came after. Not because of what it proved, but because of what it meant about the man I thought I knew. Before we get there, tell me this. If you discovered that someone close to you had been moving against you long before you ever suspected it, would you confront them, or would you go quiet and let the evidence do the work?" The footage, she confirmed. Her voice carried the weight of someone who had looked at something she could not unsee. "Be here at 9 Osrestol, and Vernon, come prepared. What I'm going to show you tomorrow is the hardest thing you'll hear through any of this. Harder than the recording, harder than the phone call." She paused. "Because this one takes away the last possibility that any of it was an accident." I set the phone on the armrest after we hung up. Hank's house sat warm and quiet around me. The furnace clicked on an older unit, a little inefficient, the kind of system I could have tuned up in 40 minutes if my left hand had been any use. I listened to it run and turned over the image of a tin box under my hallway floor, and a woman who had slipped in through the dark, copied my son's debts, and vanished without leaving a mark. I thought, this is what it looks like when people are cornered, and cornered people always make mistakes. I held on to that thought carefully, like something that could break all the way through what remained of that long, sleepless night. I arrived at Sylvia's office at 9 on the dot, the way my father had drilled into me, not early enough to read as anxious, not late enough to read as careless. Sylvia was already at the conference table with 2 mugs of coffee and a folder I hadn't seen before. She waited until I had settled into the chair and taken a sip before she opened it. That small grace giving a man a moment to find his footing before the blow lands was one of the things that reminded me most of her father. "Before we get to the plant footage, there's something I want you to see first," she said, "because I think you need to understand the full picture of why before you can see the how." She turned the folder to face me. "This is Devin's financial position as of 30 days ago." I looked at the first page, then the second. Then I set my coffee mug down because my hand had developed a faint tremor I didn't want her to notice and couldn't seem to stop. "Walk me through it," I said. "He opened 3 cryptocurrency trading accounts between 18 months and 2 years ago." Sylvia began, her voice level and deliberate like a doctor delivering a diagnosis she had rehearsed. "The total amount invested across all 3 was approximately $140,000 money he borrowed against a personal line of credit secured by the house." She turned a page. Within 8 months, all 3 accounts had lost between 80 and 94% of their value. He liquidated them at a combined loss of just under $120,000. My jaw went tight. I kept my face still. To cover the margin calls and keep the line of credit serviced, he took out 2 additional personal loans, Sylvia continued. One from a regional lender at an interest rate I'd call predatory. One from a private lending group I'd describe as significantly worse than that. She tapped the page. Combined outstanding balance on those 2 loans, $460,000. With interest accruing at the current rate, that figure grows by roughly $900 every single day. $460,000, I said. My voice came out remarkably flat. That surprised me. "Plus the crypto losses," she said. "And there's the mortgage deficiency." She turned another page. "The house in Fox Chapel, Devon bought it 4 years ago at a price that was aggressive even for that market. He financed 90%. Values in that corridor have softened since. 14 months ago, he missed his first payment. 6 months ago, the bank issued a formal notice of default. The foreclosure order was filed 8 weeks before your accident." She looked at me directly. "He and Tara have been living in a house that belongs to the bank for the better part of 2 months. The number at the bottom of the summary page read, $812,000. I pushed back from the table. I couldn't sit still with what was moving through me. I stood and pressed both palms flat against the surface for a moment, feeling the cold of the conference table against my skin, anchoring myself in something real. $812,000. I said the number silently to myself, the way you repeat a word until it stops sounding like language and starts feeling like fact. My son had been drowning in $800,000 of debt and had said nothing, had come to my hospital room asking about the compensation money instead of picking up the phone and calling his father. The ceiling of the conference room was white and bare, and I stared at it until the number found somewhere inside my chest to settle. 812 $812,000. He needed money that badly, I said to the window to the street below, to nobody in particular. And he never once picked up the phone. "No," Sylvia said quietly from behind me. "He didn't." I turned around. My eyes were hot and dry and furious in a way that had nothing to do with tears and everything to do with the specific anguish of a parent handed proof of how completely his child had chosen to go under alone, rather than reach out for help. I had rebuilt furnace systems in condemned buildings. I had pulled double shifts for months without a word of complaint. I had sold something that couldn't be replaced so my son could go to university. And he had let himself sink under $800,000 rather than dial my number. "If he had called me," I said, and my voice split clean down the middle, "even 6 months ago, even 3 months ago, I would have found a way. I don't know how, but I would have found something." Sylvia didn't reach for a platitude. She didn't tell me it wasn't my fault or that Devin had made his own bed. She simply said in the voice of someone who understood that certain grief doesn't ask for a response, "I know you would have." I came back to the table, sat down, wrapped both hands around the coffee mug, my left still in its soft, cast my right gripping the ceramic like it was the only fixed point in the room. "The cruelty," I said, slowly working it out as the words came, "wasn't about hating me, was it?" "No," Sylvia said. "I don't believe it was." "It was desperation," I said. He was going under, and I was the closest thing he thought he could grab without having to say out loud that he was going under. I looked down at the bandaging on my hand. That doesn't make it better, but it makes it something I can understand. And I need to understand it, or I won't get through the rest of this without it breaking something in me I can't afford to have broken. Sylvia watched me for a moment with those calm, unhurried eyes of hers. Then she said, "Are you ready for the footage?" I set the mug down, straightened in my chair, rolled my shoulders back the way I used to before a difficult repair job, settling myself, centering into the task. "Show me," I said. She reached across and opened the second folder, the one I had come here for. The one she had told me last night would strip away the last possibility that any of it had been an accident. "Before I play this," she said, "there's something I need you to understand. What you're about to see is going to make you angry, genuinely deeply angry. And you have every right to feel that, but I need you to stay in this chair and let me walk you through it, because how we respond to this footage in the next 48 hours determines everything that follows." She held my gaze. "Can you do that?" My chest was drawn tight as a drum. My left hand ached beneath the cast. Every part of me was braced. "I've been doing hard things my whole life," I said. "Show me the footage, Sylvia." She turned the laptop around and pressed play. It wasn't dramatic. That was the first thing that struck me, how unremarkable it looked. A gray corridor, the kind of utilitarian industrial hallway you find in every manufacturing plant in the country, washed out under the same inadequate overhead fluorescence I had walked beneath for 35 years. The timestamp in the lower right corner read 11:07 p.m., 3 days before my accident. A figure entered from the left edge of the frame. My body recognized my son before my brain did. It was the shoulders first, the particular way he carried them, the set that Devin had developed since he was 17, and decided that standing straight was a kind of armor. He had on dark clothing and a construction hard hat that was slightly too large, tipped forward over his brow. His pace was quick, without quite being a run, the measured, considered stride of someone who had rehearsed exactly how to move through a space as though he belonged there when he absolutely did not. He stopped at machine number 4. He opened the maintenance panel on the left side, the one that housed the emergency stop sensor assembly. I had opened that same panel hundreds of times. Every bolt on it was familiar to me. He reached inside with what I recognized as a small hex-tip screwdriver and began working at the sensor mounting. "Stop it there," I said. Sylvia paused the footage. I leaned forward, both hands flat on the table, my cast on the left, my right beside it, and stared at the frozen image. Devin's arm inside the panel of a machine he had never once in 32 years shown the slightest interest in understanding. "How long is he at the panel?" I asked. My voice had gone very quiet, not the calm kind of quiet, the kind a room goes before a storm front rolls in. 8 minutes and 14 seconds, Sylvia said. "Play it." She played it. I watched all 8 minutes and 14 seconds without blinking or speaking a single word. I watched my son work at a sensor I could have explained to him in 10 minutes if he had ever thought to ask. I watched him close the panel, check the corridor in both directions, and retrace his steps the way he'd come. I watched that hallway sit empty after he was gone, gray and ordinary, and completely undisturbed on the surface, while underneath the panel he'd just finished with. Something had been set to fail. When the screen went dark, I leaned back in my chair. My chest felt like it had been hollowed out with something blunt. Not sharp blunt. The kind of damage that doesn't cut clean, but tears. "Tell me what he did to it," I said. "Exactly." The emergency stop sensor on that model of hydraulic press is designed to detect any obstruction in the press zone and halt the downstroke immediately. Sylvia said, drawing a technical diagram from the folder she had prepared, had anticipated I would need to understand the mechanics. Devin reversed the polarity on the sensor's trigger wire. It's a straightforward modification if you know what you're doing, and a catastrophic one if you don't understand how the machine will respond. "He didn't know," I said. "No, he didn't." She explained that the reversal caused the sensor to read the presence of an obstruction as an all clear rather than a stop signal. Under standard operating conditions, the press would have cycled without any problem. But given the specific variables that night, the hydraulic pressure, the temperature, the casting configuration, the machine reacted to the reverse signal by accelerating the downstroke instead of a resting sit. She set the diagram down. He was aiming for a malfunction, a minor jam, something that would produce a minor hand injury enough to file a claim, not enough to cause serious damage. "He miscalculated," I said. "Catastrophically," Sylvia said. "The machine did not behave the way he expected. I got up from the table because I could not hold this sitting in a chair. I walked back to the window, the same window I had stood at 20 minutes earlier, absorbing $800,000 of debt. Now I was standing at it again, trying to absorb something so far beyond money that money felt almost quaint by comparison. My son had reached inside a machine I operated. He had tampered with the safety system I relied on to walk out at the end of a shift. He had done it sloppily with the misplaced confidence of someone who had watched one too many instructional videos and mistaken that for knowing how things actually work. And what his carelessness had produced was 11 months of surgery and recovery and the permanent loss of full function in my left index finger. "Vernon," Sylvia's voice came from behind me, careful, measured. "There's something important I need to tell you before you decide how to respond to this." I turned around. "This footage establishes intent to cause a workplace injury for financial gain," she said. "Under Pennsylvania Revised Code 2909.02. Deliberate damage to industrial equipment resulting in bodily injury constitutes aggravated arson or criminal mischief, depending on how the prosecution frames it. Combined with the insurance fraud elements, the phone call to the carrier before the accident, we are looking at multiple serious felony charges." She paused. "But Vernon, the moment we take this to the police, Devin will lawyer up, and the civil process becomes significantly more complicated. If we wait, if we let him keep making moves while we keep building the record, the case becomes airtight in a way no defense attorney can dismantle." I looked at her for a long moment, at the diagram on the table, at the frozen laptop screen still showing the empty corridor. "How much longer?" I asked. "Not long," she said. "He's running out of room. Desperate people accelerate. He'll make his next move within the week. And when he does—" She stopped. Her phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at the screen and something shifted behind her eyes, contained but unmistakably changed. "Actually," she said, "I may have just received something about Tara." She looked up at me. "It appears she's made a move of her own." My spine went rigid all over again. "What kind of move?" Sylvia picked up the phone, read the message through fully, then set it back on the table with the deliberate steadiness of someone handling something that will require precision. "Sit down, Vernon," she said. "Because this one I did not see coming." "Then tell me," I said. She placed the phone face down, folded her hands, and looked at me directly. "Tara's real estate brokerage has been under a quiet investigation by the Pennsylvania Division of Real Estate and Professional Licensing for the past 6 weeks. My investigator has a contact there, nothing improper, just someone who flags when names I've identified appear on filings that cross their desk." She paused. "This morning, my investigator received confirmation that the division has expanded the inquiry to include potential forgery charges." "Forgery," I repeated. "Under Pennsylvania Revised Code 2913, creating or using a forged instrument in connection with a real estate transaction carries felony charges up to the 3rd degree, depending on the dollar value involved." Sylvia opened a thin folder I hadn't noticed tucked beneath the main one. 3 transactions over the past 14 months. In each case, a seller's signature on a material document appears to have been replicated, not executed by the original party. My stomach turned. "She forged signatures on real estate documents." "The division believes so, yes." Sylvia turned a page. "What makes this development particularly significant, Vernon, is not the forgery itself. It's who reported it." Something in how she said it sent a chill up the back of my neck. "Devin?" Devin," she confirmed. His attorney, or rather the attorney Devin had been using before that attorney's loyalties became complicated, submitted documentation to the licensing division 9 days ago. Technically anonymous, but the submission was traced to a filing address connected to Devin's former firm. She held my gaze. He kept copies of everything Tara ever handled, every document, every transaction. He's been sitting on them. I leaned back and pressed my good hand over my mouth for a moment, letting the full weight of what I was hearing settle across me, like something with physical mass. Devin had learned in that hospital consultation room that Caleb was not his son. He had not confronted Tara. He had not walked out. He had gone home and gone very, very quiet. And while he was quiet, he had been building something a case against his own wife. "He's despised her since the hospital," I said. "Since Caleb." "I think that's right," Sylvia said. And rather than address it head on, he chose to remove her from the equation in a way that also served his financial position. If Tara is facing felony charges, she can't easily access joint assets. She can't credibly pursue any legal action against him. And he casts himself as the wrong party, betrayed by his wife, separated from his criminal partner, which theoretically makes him appear more sympathetic in any proceeding involving you. Except it doesn't work that way, I said, because the evidence against him stands independent of anything she did. Exactly, Sylvia said. He's outmaneuvered himself. He believes clearing Tara off the board simplifies his position. It doesn't. It just means he'll face everything alone. Sylvia's investigator called her office at 2:17 that afternoon to confirm what we had already half expected. Officers from the Pennsylvania State Police Economic Crimes Unit had arrived at Tara's brokerage on Baum Boulevard at 1:45. The arrest, or rather, as Sylvia put it carefully, the custodial detention pending arraignment, had taken place at approximately 2:15. Sylvia's investigator had been nearby. He described it to her, and she described it to me. Tara had been at her desk when the officers came in. She had been on a phone call. She ended it with a composure that apparently gave even the arresting officers pause, setting the handset down, straightening a pen on her desk, rising smoothly as though she had been expecting this appointment and had simply been waiting for it to arrive. They read her rights. She listened without interrupting. The investigator noted that was unusual. Devin wasn't supposed to be there. Nobody had asked him to come, and he held no legal standing in that office. He had planted himself near the reception doorway, near enough to see everything, far enough to stay outside whatever was officially occurring. When the officers walked Tara toward the exit, she turned and found him with her eyes across the room. She smiled, not a warm smile, not anything that belonged in the same neighborhood as warmth. It was the precise glacial smile of a woman who has traced the shape of the trap she's in and is wholly unsurprised by who set it. "You really think," she said, clearly loudly audible to two other agents and the receptionist, "that you're the only one who kept evidence, Devin?" Then she went with the officers and didn't look back. I was still sitting in Sylvia's conference room when she finished telling me. My coffee had been cold for a while. I let a silence pass before I spoke. "She saw it coming," I said. She worked out that he'd turn on her maybe before the thought had fully formed in his own head. "She took those photographs in your hallway and walked away without disturbing a thing," Sylvia said. "She got what she needed and then she sat on it. Anything she accumulated on Devin through the years of that marriage, none of it surfaced tonight. She'll bring it out at the moment it causes the most harm." Two animals backed into corners. I said more to myself than to her, going for each other's throats. "Which serves our purposes," Sylvia said, measured as always. "Provided we're not standing between them when it happens." She shifted forward in her chair. "Vernon, the window coming up is going to be unpredictable. Devin has lost the one person who was running alongside him. He's exposed on several criminal fronts at once. Tara is in custody, and she's not forgiving. People stripped of their external outlets tend to lunge at whatever's left." Those even unhurried eyes of hers settled on me. "Stay at Hank's, let unfamiliar numbers ring out, and do not walk into your house by yourself, not for any reason." You think he'd actually show up there? A man who crept into an industrial facility at 11:00 at night, Sylvia said quietly, has already shown us what he's willing to do. I won't underestimate him, and neither should you. A beat. Let him move first. Don't cut across whatever he does next, because whatever that next move is, it's the one that finishes this. The drive back to Hank's was slow. Through the early dark, the city's lights blinking on, one by one, across a route my hands knew by memory. I turned over the image of Tara, leaving that office hands behind her back, that cold and calculated smile on her face. Devin in the reception area, watching her go. Two people who had spent years extracting everything reachable from my life, now dismantling each other with the same appetite. And underneath all of it, a thought I couldn't shake somewhere inside that wreckage is still my son. Still the child I raised. Whether anything of him remained worth reaching, I couldn't yet say. But I wasn't ready to stop believing the answer might be yes. Thursday broke cold and clear, the kind of November morning this city summons occasionally almost as an apology before pulling the gray back down for the rest of the season. Sylvia rang at 8:00. "Dress for comfort," she said. "We may be waiting a while." She wouldn't elaborate on the phone. When I reached her office at 8:30, she already had her coat button keys in her palm. a cup of coffee extended toward me, and an expression of sharpened readiness I hadn't encountered on her before, the look of someone who has spent a long time arranging dominoes and can see the first one tipping. "Where are we headed?" I asked, accepting the cup. "Penn Avenue," she said. "Ground floor of an office building. There's a notary there. Devin has a 10-general appointment to execute documents that would transfer your former house into a buyer's name. She let that sit the way you set something heavy down after carrying it a long time. He located a buyer through a go-between 3 days ago. The sale price is substantially under market. He can't afford for this to drag on." Something moved through my chest, not satisfaction. Satisfaction would have been too clean. It was more like the feeling of watching a front you've been following for weeks finally arrive on shore. He's selling my house to dig himself out of the debt. That act, attempting to transfer property to a third party for below market value while under an active creditor judgment, constitutes fraudulent conveyance under Pennsylvania Revised Code 11364, Sylvia said as we walked toward the elevator. "Legally, it entitles the defrauded creditor to void the sale and go after the asset directly." She hit the call button. "I put the bank that holds Devin's foreclosure order on notice about this transaction 4 days ago. They went to Allegheny County Court with an emergency injunction yesterday evening." "And this morning?" I asked. "This morning," she said, stepping into the elevator, "it was granted." We parked near Penn Avenue, found a coffee shop with a window table looking straight across at the building with the notary on the ground floor, and settled in coats still on cups, in hand eyes on the street. At 9:53, the black Lexus nosed into view. I hadn't seen that car since it was idling in my driveway at 4 in the morning, the night of the accident. Devin pulled into the small adjacent lot, awkwardly correcting twice before he was straight, and stepped out in a charcoal overcoat I'd never seen on him. The weight loss was obvious even from across the street. The coat had been bought for a different man, or bought recently for the man he used to be. He kept his eyes forward and walked with the locked-in pace of someone running against a clock. "Does he have any idea about the injunction?" I asked. "In approximately 10 minutes he will," Sylvia said, curling both hands around her cup. 10 minutes turned out to be generous. At 10:08, a gray sedan bearing a bank insignia on the door eased into the lot alongside the Lexus. 2 men in business suits emerged with a manila envelope between them. A tow truck swung onto Penn Avenue 2 minutes after that and settled at the curb engine running. At 10:17, Devin pushed back through the building's front door. He had a single sheet of paper in his hand, the injunction I took it to be, and his face had gone the color of a man handed news in a public room that his body hadn't finished catching up to. Whatever flush had been in his cheeks was gone, replaced by a blotched, uneven pallor, the skin of someone absorbing a blow that landed faster than they braced for. The 2 men from the sedan cut across his path on the sidewalk. The shorter one addressed him. Devin shook his head. Jaw tight said something that didn't reach us through the glass. The man spoke again and raised the envelope. Devin stepped back. Across the lot, the tow operator had already run his hook under the Lexus. I watched Devin register it. The injunction paper buckled in his fist, not deliberately, the way a hand closes when something underneath the knees threatens to give. He called something out toward the tow operator, loud enough now that scraps of sound carried across the street. No words I could parse, only the timbre of a man operating on fury and fear with the thinking part switched off. The operator didn't engage. He walked his perimeter check, reviewed his paperwork, climbed up into the cab. The Lexus lifted off the asphalt with a hydraulic groan, front end dipping as the rear rose. Devin moved toward it 2 steps. The shorter man from the bank placed himself in the way, unhurried, definitive, the way you occupy a threshold to make clear it's no longer open. Devin went still. He stood on the Penn Avenue sidewalk in thin November sunlight and watched his car haul away. The overcoat hung loose on his frame. The crumpled court order was still balled in his fist. A woman steering a stroller navigated around him without a glance. I turned to Sylvia. She wasn't gloating. Her face held something else entirely, the composure of someone watching an outcome they had engineered, but taken no pleasure in, because what was necessary and what was bearable had never been the same category. "He's got one more move left in him," I said. "Something larger, something born out of having nothing left to lose." "Yes," Sylvia said. "He is." She lifted her coffee, and when he does, we'll be ready. We stayed another few minutes. Devin eventually turned and headed back inside the building, likely needing somewhere away from the street to make the calls that follow a morning like that one. The city resumed its indifferent rhythm, delivery trucks rolling past the first of the lunch crowd, spilling out everything, continuing as though nothing had happened. The tow truck, the injunction at the crumpled paper in Devon's fist. I turned it all over in my mind. The machine was running out of runway, and this time it wasn't my hand caught in the press. I had been carrying that envelope for 3 weeks now. Lorraine had put it in my hands herself. The last morning her mind was clear, propped up in the hospital bed, with a steadiness in her eyes she hadn't shown in days, her grip on my wrist firm, even in fingers that had gone thin with illness. If there comes a day when Devon needs to hear the truth, she had told me, give him this. You'll know when. After that, she let her eyes close, and we never had another real conversation again. I had kept the envelope tucked in the inner pocket of my winter coat against my chest, as close as I could get it. Every morning, for those 3 weeks, I'd asked myself the same thing. Is today the day? Sunday night, I made up my mind. I texted Devon at 9:00 p.m., nothing elaborate. Coffee, Perrysville Avenue, 8:00 a.m., come alone. I put the phone face down and didn't sit around waiting for a reply. He'd show or he wouldn't. There was nothing left for me to do. He showed. 11 minutes late, which meant he had come close to not showing at all, and had used those 11 minutes wrestling himself into it. He looked worse than he had on Penn Avenue. Thinner, his coat hanging wrong on his frame, dark hollows under his eyes, that told the story of a man lying awake in a hotel room that belonged to someone else's life. He dropped into the seat across from me and closed both hands around the coffee mug the waitress had already set out, not bothering with the menu, not looking at me. "Talk, Dad," he said. The Polish was gone from his voice, no trace of the measured financial analyst tone he usually kept polished and in place, just the rough grain underneath. "Thank you for coming," I said. He glanced up at that fast, as if the words had caught him off balance, like he'd steeled himself for something with harder edges, and didn't know what to do when he didn't find it. I pulled the envelope from inside my coat and set it on the table between us. He studied it without reaching for it. Yellowed worn at the corners, his name across the front in Lorraine's hand, that wide, unhurried cursive of a woman who had never touched a keyboard and saw no reason to start. The moment he recognized her writing, his jaw went tight, his throat moved. "What is this?" he asked, his voice carrying the faint note of a man not entirely certain he wanted to know. "A letter from your mother," I said. "She put it in my keeping before she passed. She told me you'd need it one day." I slid it a little closer across the table. "I believe that day is now." Devon looked at the envelope without touching it for a long moment. His grip on the coffee mug tightened, the tendons rising sharp along the backs of his hands. Then slowly, he reached out and took it. He opened it with a carefulness I wouldn't have predicted, easing the flap back the way you handle something that might not survive rough treatment. Inside 3 pages of Lorraine's handwriting, dense and deliberate, the hand of a woman who had things to say and was going to say every last one of them. I watched my son read his mother's words. I watched what it did to his face, the way weather moves across open ground, not all at once. A change in the light first, then something underneath shifting. His brow drew together before he'd finished the first page. Halfway through the second, his jaw had simply stopped moving and gone rigid. By the 3rd page, his hands were shaking, not in the small, contained way of someone keeping a lid on themselves, but openly the way a man's hands shake when his body has been braced against something for too long and can't hold the position anymore. The letter told him what the money had been. His university tuition, what Lorraine had always called the scholarship, a word she had picked with care because it was accurate in its way. That money had come out of someone's body, so his future could exist. It told him that 23 years ago, his father had sold a kidney at UPMC Presbyterian, quietly. No announcement, no request for acknowledgement, no expectation of thanks. Not even the small grace of being seen for what he'd done. "Dad." The word came apart and his mouth cracked down the center. He raised his eyes from the page and they were wet, not overflowing, not yet, but glistening. The look of a man who has kept the door locked on that particular room for a very long time and can feel the hinges starting to fail. "That this can't be." "It's true," I said. He cut himself off, clamped his lips together hard. His chest was moving visibly now, the deliberate, effortful breathing of someone losing a fight they're still trying to win. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" "Because it wasn't an exchange," I said. "I didn't do it expecting something back. You needed it. I had something I could give. That was the whole of it." Devon laid the letter down on the table with both hands, gently, the way you set down something breakable. He pressed the heel of his right hand hard against his mouth. His shoulders seized once a single involuntary shudder. He choked back immediately, and then he flattened both palms on the table and dropped his gaze to them. I watched all of this, and somewhere in the middle of it, I shifted in my chair to reach for my coffee, and that small movement let my flannel shirt pull free on the left side. The scar caught the light the way it always did, pale and long, arcing from below my ribs down toward my hip, the remnant of an operation I had never once offered an explanation for, because no one had ever put the question to me. Devin saw it. I didn't realize he had, until I heard the sound. He made something short and broken, the sound that comes out of a man when something gets through every wall he has built around the softest part of himself. He raised his hand and covered his eyes. His shoulders gave. And then my son, who hadn't let me see him cry since he was 9 years old, and came off his bicycle, put his face down into his hands at a corner table in a diner on Perrysville Avenue and wept. Not carefully, not with any concern for what it looked like. He wept the way you do when you've been compressing something too large into too tight a space for too many years. All chest, all sound, his hands trembling against his face, his coffee sitting untouched and cooling in front of him. I did not extend my hand across the table. I did not say it was going to be fine, because it wasn't fine, and we were both clear on that, and pretending otherwise would have been a small cruelty to us both. I sat there and gave him the space to cry, the same way you let a wound clean itself before you stitch it shut. After a time, I got to my feet, pulled on my coat, put money down for both cups. "Finish your coffee, Devin," I said, my voice level and low. "It's going cold." I pushed through the door into the December morning and didn't look back. Through the glass behind me, I could make out the muffled sound of my son still sitting at that table, still crying. And I thought, crossing the cold lot toward my truck, that sound, as hard as it was to walk away from, was the most truthful thing he had given me in a very long time. 10 days after Perrysville Avenue, Devin hosted an investor dinner at the Omni William Penn, downtown, $200 a plate. I knew about it because Sylvia had gotten hold of an invitation through someone she knew in the local business community, cream card stock. Raised lettering, the kind of printing that runs more per piece than most people budget for a meal. The evening was being marketed as an exclusive portfolio realignment opportunity. The phrase people reach for, I had learned, when they need capital and can't come out and say it. Sylvia phoned me the Monday before it was scheduled. "I need you there," she said. "Not as a guest, just nearby close to the exit. Get there by 7:15. Tell the host at the door, your name is William from the Cuyahoga Valley Business Council. I've arranged it." "What's going to happen?" I asked. "Something that needed to happen a long time ago," she said. "Wear the dark blazer." I wore the dark blazer. It had been hanging untouched since Lorraine's retirement party years back. It still sat across my shoulders the way old clothes do when time has passed, but you haven't changed as much as you might have thought. The ballroom on the 12th floor of the Omni William Penn was everything Devin had spent his adult life trying to turn into reality. Round tables draped in white linen. Lighting kept low enough to make everyone look more prosperous than they probably were. Servers in black threading through the crowd, carrying wine that I guessed ran $20 a glass. I counted close to 90 people, investors, colleagues, the sort of figures from the Philadelphia adjacent to money world, who come to these evenings to be noticed and to notice, and who might pull out a checkbook if the pitch catches them right. I posted myself near the main exit, back against the wall, a spot where I could take in the whole room without drawing attention. A server came by with wine. I accepted a glass and left it untouched. Devin stepped up to the small raised platform at the far end of the room at 7:45. His best suit, deep navy, the one I recognized from the headshot on his firm's website, still fit him, well, despite the weight he'd shed. Hair perfectly set, spine straight. He had the look of a man who had spent 10 days reconstructing himself from the surface inward because that was the only direction he knew to work. "Good evening," he said, and his voice moved across the room with the ease of someone who had stood at enough microphones to know how to make a large space feel intimate. "I want to thank you all for being here tonight. What I have to share with you represents a fundamental shift in how I see opportunity in this market." He was good. Whatever else Devin had made of himself, he had mastered the art of standing before a crowd and making them want to trust him. I could see it happening, faces tilting forward, hands drifting to wine glasses with the unhurried ease of people who believe they belong exactly where they are. Then his attorney rose from his seat. I had caught a glimpse of the man once briefly outside the courthouse during the guardianship filing, mid-40s, silver-haired, carrying the polished calm of someone whose hourly rate had long since freed him from the need to impress. He stood and said pleasantly and at perfect volume, "If I could have just a moment before we go further, there's a separate opportunity I'd like to bring to your attention, one I think will interest several of you specifically." Devin's gaze locked onto him from the platform. "David, it won't take long," the attorney said, already crossing toward a second microphone positioned at the side of the room. His expression was settled, the expression of a man who had made his choice and felt nothing but certain about it. From somewhere near the bar on the far side of the room, Tara emerged from the shadow she had apparently been standing in long enough that no one had noticed her, wearing the kind of understated black dress that takes real money to make look effortless. She positioned herself beside the attorney and faced the room with a composed smile. On the platform, Devin went completely still. "Ladies and gentlemen," the attorney said into the microphone, "Tara Winslow and I have recently formalized a partnership that I believe represents a genuinely exciting—" He didn't finish. The large screen behind the presentation platform came to life. It was not Devin's investment deck. It was footage from the Mercy General Medical Center emergency room bay. Timestamp 4:06 a.m. The image slightly bleached the way security camera footage always is, but clear enough for anyone in that room to follow. I recognized it before a single word of audio came through the speakers. Something in my chest drew tight like a hand closing into a fist. Devin's voice filled the ballroom. 60 years old, and still just a worthless factory rat. Then Tara's voice half a beat behind. "The smell of this place is already on my coat." The room went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with courtesy. This was the stillness of 90 people who had all arrived at the same understanding, in the same instant, that they were seeing something. They had no business seeing something that was never meant for them. Nobody moved. Somewhere a wineglass met a table, and the sound carried across the room like a sharp knock. Devin had both hands locked on the podium edge. His knuckles were white. His face had the stripped, unguarded look of a man whose every wall had just come down simultaneously. The attorney and Tara, meanwhile, were not watching the screen. They were watching each other with the mildly bewildered expressions of people who had expected a certain outcome, but not this exact one, which told me clearly enough that they had not been the ones to arrange the video. Somebody else had. I glanced toward the main exit. Sylvia was standing just inside the doors, eyes on the screen. She sensed me looking and turned her head. One small, deliberate nod. Then she turned and walked out. Devin's gaze moved across the room in a slow sweep table by table, reading the faces of people who had known him professionally for years. Nobody was angry. Nobody raised a voice. They were simply watching him with the settled, quiet finality of people who had just made a decision they would not be revisiting. I set my untouched wine on the nearest passing tray. I buttoned my blazer, walked to the exit, and passed through it into the carpeted hallway beyond, where the air was still and carried none of the weight of what I had just left behind. I stood at the elevator bank for a moment, listening to the muted sounds bleeding through the ballroom doors. Then I pressed the button and rode down. The Tuesday after the Omni, William Penn's Sylvia called me at Hank's place just after 8 in the morning. I was in the kitchen standing at the counter with my coffee, watching the snow that had started overnight lay itself down across Hank's backyard in thin, patchy drifts. Hank himself had already headed out for his morning walk. The man walked 4 miles every morning, regardless of whether had done it for 30 years, and regarded anyone who skipped it as having made a personal choice. He respected it, but did not understand. "He made his move," Sylvia said, skipping any preamble. My grip on the mug tightened. "Tell me." "Last night after the Omni, William Penn." Devin reached out to a man named Brock Halton, a former colleague from his financial services, years now working as a broker at a mid-size insurance firm. They spoke by phone at 11:42 p.m. She paused. "Devin told Holton that you had suffered significant cognitive decline following your workplace injury. He represented that your doctors had concluded you lacked the capacity to manage your own legal and financial affairs. He requested that Halton initiate an early claims review on your life insurance policy, the 500th at the $1,000 term policy naming Devin as sole beneficiary. He tried to collect my life insurance," I said, standing in Hank's kitchen drinking coffee. "He did," Sylvia said. What he didn't know is that I had Devin under active surveillance starting the morning after I showed you the plant footage. He made that call from the hotel lobby bar, an open semi-public space. My investigator was in that room, the same as any other guest, and heard every word. Under Pennsylvania law, there is nothing unlawful about that. The conversation with Holton was documented in full. She paused again, and this pause had a different quality to it. The quality of a door being opened to something that didn't close back. Vernon, what Devin did constitutes federal insurance fraud under 18 U.S.C. 1343 wire fraud and related federal statutes. The moment he made that call, he moved out of civil exposure and into criminal federal jurisdiction. Something happened to my legs. Not quite weakness, more the sensation of feeling the ground shift just slightly underfoot and finding yourself adjusting your balance before you've consciously registered why. I pulled out a kitchen chair and sat down hard. "You filed it," I said. "I submitted the recording and a formal complaint to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division at 7 this morning," Sylvia said. "They move faster than I expected. I believe the combination of prior evidence, the plant footage, the insurance phone call before the accident, the guardianship fraud made this a clean package." A brief pause. "They're going to his hotel this morning, Vernon. Probably within the hour." I sat at Hank's kitchen table and looked out at the snow. I thought about a boy who had grown up under my roof, who had eaten breakfast at a table, not unlike this one, who had walked in from his first day of high school, with his shirt untucked and his face carefully arranged to hide the fact that the day had been hard. I turned over all the versions of Devin that existed between that boy and the man who had placed a phone call at 11:42 p.m. to collect money on his living father. "Sylvia," my voice came out rough at the edges. "When this is over, all of it, is there anything left for him, any version of a life?" She didn't answer right away, which I was grateful for. She took the question seriously. "That depends entirely on Devin," she said at last. "Not on what happens in court, not on what we do or don't do, on what he decides to do with whatever comes after." She paused. "You can't answer that question for him, Vernon. You know that?" "I know," I said. "I just needed to hear myself ask it." Sylvia's voice eased just slightly at the edges. "He's not gone yet. People have pulled themselves back from worse. But first, he has to stop digging." We said goodbye, and I stayed at the table a long while after. The snow kept falling. Hank's furnace clicked on and off in its slightly inefficient rhythm, the kind of system I could have tuned up in an afternoon if my hand were fully healed. Old habits of mind. At 9:47, Sylvia sent a text. "Done. 2 agents. He didn't run. I read it 3 times. Then I turned my phone face down on the table, pressed both palms flat against Hank's kitchen surface, and breathed long and deliberate. The way I had taught myself to breathe through hard things. Not to make them smaller, just survivable. My son was not going to call me from that hotel room. He was going to call a criminal defense attorney, and that was the right call, the only call he should be making. I understood that. I accepted it. What I could not accept, what I would not, was the idea that this was where the story ended. Not yet. There were still things that needed to happen, actions that words could not accomplish, things I needed to do rather than say. I picked up my coffee and drank what was left of it. Cold push back from the table, went to the window, and stood there watching the snow come down over Hank's backyard, covering everything in white, making the world look briefly like something that hadn't been written on yet. That was the thing about snow. It never lasted, but for a little while it made everything look like it still had a chance to start over. Sylvia had mentioned it in passing the week before, almost as a footnote. Tara had been released on bail 4 days after her arrest, pending formal arraignment. A first offense white-collar charge in Pennsylvania rarely meant pre-trial detention, especially for someone with no prior record and an established address. She was out back behind the wheel of her car, moving through the city, as though she could feel the walls drawing in, and was trying to stay ahead of them. I didn't spend much time thinking about her after that. I had enough on my mind. I no longer believe in coincidence the way I once did. 35 years working around machinery teaches you that nothing happens without a cause. Every breakdown traces back to something. Every failure leaves a trail. So, when I tell you what happened on I-376 that Thursday night, I'm not going to call it coincidence. I'm going to call it what it felt like in the moment, inevitable. As if everything set in motion since November had been converging on this particular stretch of highway, at this particular hour, the way water finds the lowest point available to it. I had been at Sylvia's office until nearly 9 that evening, going over the timeline for the upcoming civil hearing. The snow had returned heavier than Tuesday, the kind of lake effect dump that comes off Wheeling and turns the highway system into something requiring full concentration and reduced speed. I was doing 50 on I-376 westbound, both hands on the wheel, when I saw the headlights ahead of me go sideways. A dark sedan had caught a patch of black ice on the curve near the Edgewater Park exit. The rear end swung out. The driver overcorrected. I could see it unfolding with the slow, terrible clarity of someone who has spent decades developing a feel for mechanical failure. And then, the car left the road entirely, broke through the thin safety rail at the curve's edge, and dropped down the embankment toward the frozen lake. I had my hazard lights on and was pulling onto the shoulder before the sound of the impact reached me. I called 911 at a run. The dispatcher confirmed units were 4 to 6 minutes out. I told her I was going down the embankment. She told me to wait for emergency services. I told her I understood, and went anyway. The embankment was steeper than it looked, treacherous with ice beneath the snow. I went down sideways, caught a concrete abutment with my right hand, and hit the lakeshore stumbling. The car had broken through the ice shelf at the edge, rear half submerged, nose angled up at roughly 30 degrees, driver's side door, still accessible, but sinking. I got the door open on the second pull. The driver was conscious barely. A woman's seatbelt, still engaged airbag, deflated against her chest. She was shaking so hard her teeth were audible. Dark, impossibly cold water was rising fast around her ankles. "I've got you," I said, reaching across to release the seatbelt. "I've got you. Can you move your legs?" She turned her head toward me, and in the dim light bouncing off the snow and the ice, I saw Tara's face. My hands did not stop moving. That is the thing I want to be clear about. There was no pause, no moment of reconsideration, no calculation weighing anything against anything else. My hands kept working because a person was in freezing water, and that was the only fact that existed. "Vernon?" Her voice came out fractured and barely audible. "Don't talk," I said. "Hold on to my arm, both hands. When I push with your legs as hard as you can." She grabbed my right arm with both of hers, gripping with the desperate, bone-deep strength of someone who has run out of options. I braced my feet against the doorframe and pulled. She came free hard and fast, and we both went backward onto the ice shelf, her weight coming down partially across me. The ice groaned under us. I rolled us both toward shore, moving without stopping until we were off the ice and onto the frozen mud of the embankment. Tara was shaking so violently she could barely form words. I can't. "You're out," I said. "You're out of the water. Breathe." I pulled off my coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. She was soaked through, hair plastered to her face, expensive clothes ruined beyond saving. I kept one hand on her back, not exactly for comfort, more to track her breathing, the way you monitor a piece of equipment you're not yet sure has stabilized. The sirens were getting closer. Tara looked down at the hand on her back. My left hand in its soft cast 4 fingers, visible where the glove had been lost somewhere in the water. She stared at it for a moment, with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Not contempt, not calculation, not the composed performance of a woman managing how she was perceived. Something raw and stripped bare, like a room after all the furniture has been cleared out. "Why?" Her voice was still shaking, but underneath the trembling, it was quiet, genuinely bewildered, the sound of someone whose existing framework has just failed to account for something in front of them. "After everything, why did you stop?" I looked at her for a moment, at the mascara tracking down her face, at my coat hanging off her 4 sizes too large, at the question in her eyes that seemed to catch her as off guard as it caught me. "Because you were in the water," I said. That was the only answer I had. It was also the complete truth. The ambulance came down the embankment access road 30 seconds later. 2 paramedics took over with practiced efficiency, wrapping Tara in thermal blankets, checking her pupils. One of them glanced at my soaked shirt and started to ask if I needed. "I'm fine," I said. "Take care of her." I stood on the frozen lakeshore and watched them work. The snow kept coming down behind me. More sirens were arriving on the highway above. The lake was dark and still, where the car had broken through, already beginning to close back over the gap in the cold. In the ambulance, just before they shut the doors, I heard Tara say something to the paramedic. Her words reached me clearly through the cold. "The man who pulled me out," she told them. "He was missing a finger." And then the crying started. Nothing like the measured, image-conscious tears she had always kept within certain limits. These were raw, full-body sobs. The kind that come out of someone when everything they had built around themselves gives way at once, and the only person left standing over them is the one they had least earned that from. The doors sealed and the ambulance pulled away. I stayed where I was in the snow and watched until it disappeared. The Allegheny County Courthouse in December hasn't changed in any way that matters. The same gray stone stairs, the same pigeons indifferent to whatever human business is being conducted behind those walls, the same bone-deep cold that comes from a structure designed to outlast every last person who ever passes through it. I got there 40 minutes before I needed to, and sat in my truck inside the parking structure watching people make their way up those steps. Attorneys hauling briefcases on wheels, a young pair walking in hand, an old man in a veteran's cap, unhurried but deliberate, each of them carrying their own reason for being there. I had put on the same dark suit from Lorraine's funeral. Across the chest, it pulled in a way it hadn't back then. That's what grief and years do. They alter a man gradually and he doesn't notice until some old garment tells him. Sylvia found me in the lobby at 8:45. "How are you?" she asked. "Ready," I told her. Not the same answer, but the honest one. The gallery filled more quickly than I had anticipated. Word moves through Philadelphia the way it always has, and I saw faces in those rows that I knew. Dario, who had been first to my side the night the press took my hand, sat in the third row, his hands clasped in his lap. A pair of other overnight men from the plant sat on either side of him. Hank Pruitt had made the trip, which I hadn't expected. When I caught his eye, he gave me a nod, just one, the kind that doesn't need words. Devin was at the respondent's table with a court-appointed attorney, a young woman who managed to appear both capable and depleted at the same time. He didn't turn when I walked in. His gaze stayed fixed somewhere between his own hands and the judge's bench, not settling on either. He had lost more weight. The exhaustion on him wasn't the kind a few good nights would touch. Sylvia built the case the only way she knew how. One piece at a time, no flourishes, no raised voice, just the evidence laid down, in the order that made its own argument. First came the plant footage. The screen at the front of the courtroom showed Devin at machine number 4, 7:11 p.m., 3 days before my accident. The court-appointed attorney raised 2 objections. The judge turned them both back without comment. Second, the insurance call. Clifford Monroe took the stand and read from his firm's certified call log, the date, the time, the exact questions Devin had posed about payout schedules and disbursement to family. Devin's attorney cross-examined 3 times. Monroe's account didn't waver. Third, the dash cam, audio. The bailiff brought up the volume, and the room heard Tara's voice come through the speakers. "Why don't we just leave him? Let the old man bleed out." Then Devin's reply. Nobody in the gallery made a sound. The room settled into that particular stillness that comes over people when evidence confirms a suspicion they'd already been carrying, and they find themselves uncertain whether to feel vindicated or just sad. Fourth, the federal fraud filing. Sylvia entered the FBI documentation into the record as certified exhibits. Devin's attorney stayed quiet. There was no ground left to contest. After Sylvia took her seat, the judge read in silence for 4 minutes. The courtroom held its breath. Dario stared at his hands. Hank kept his eyes on me. I watched a narrow strip of December sky through the high window above the bench, pale, featureless, not interested in any of it. The judge raised his head. "The evidence before this court establishes clearly and beyond reasonable civil dispute that the plaintiff's workplace injury was the direct result of deliberate and reckless interference with industrial safety equipment by the defendant." He squared the papers on the bench. "The court finds in favor of the plaintiff. Allegheny Industrial Works and its insurers are directed to pay compensatory and punitive damages totaling $5 million. He shifted his gaze to Devin. "Criminal proceedings currently before the federal court are a separate matter and will be handled accordingly." One strike of the gavel, Dario began to clap. The judge called the room to order, but for that one moment in that cold, gray December courtroom, the sound of a man who had stood beside me on the night shift for 22 years, putting everything he had into that applause, was the only thing in the room worth hearing. Sylvia slid a document across the table to me. A transfer order. $5 million designated for the Family Violence Prevention Fund of Greater Philadelphia, an organization that offered legal and financial help to people caught in domestic abuse and financial exploitation. I lifted the pen, my hand didn't shake. "Vernon." Sylvia barely above a murmur, just the two of us. "You certain, more certain than I've ever been about anything?" I said, and I put my name to it. Devin was already in the hallway when I pushed through the doors. He wasn't there to intercept me. He was just there standing by a water fountain with his coat still on, and his attorney nowhere in sight. He looked up at the sound of my footsteps. Before I had fully taken in what was happening, he went down onto one knee on the floor of that hallway. No performance in it, just a man whose legs gave out before his pride could mount a defense. "Dad!" His voice broke in two, eyes red wet, not bothering to conceal any of it. I don't know how to... I'm sorry, I know that doesn't... He couldn't finish. His jaw trembled. "I'm sorry?" I stood looking at my son on the cold marble floor of the Allegheny County Courthouse. Every version of him that had ever existed felt present, right then. The kid who came off his bicycle, the young man accepting his diploma, the man he had let himself become, and whoever might still be waiting on the other side of all of this if he decided to go looking. "Get up, Devin," I said. Level, quiet, no heat behind it. Your mother would not want to see you on your knees in a courthouse hallway. I let a moment pass. "I'm not the one who punished you. You handled that yourself. What matters now is the choice you make going forward." He pushed himself upright with the deliberateness of a man testing whether his body will cooperate. His face was open in a way I wasn't sure I'd ever seen before, undone, unmanaged, nothing held back. I held that look for a long beat. Then I stepped around him and walked toward the elevator. I didn't turn around, but I left the door open at my back, and I carried the hope, whatever I still had left of it, that one day he would come through it. The week following the hearing, I put my signature on the purchase agreement for the Northside Industrial Building on Reedsdale Street. $300,000 out of the trust account, the funds I had repositioned before any of this, set in motion the money Devin had spent weeks hunting for. I went through the building by myself, afterwards stood at the center of the main floor, and took in the smell of machine oil and cold steel, the smell that had been the backdrop to my entire working life. What I saw wasn't a derelict plant. I saw benches. I saw men who looked like me, men with age on their hands, men who still knew how to construct things, who no longer had anywhere to do it, a place to teach trades. That's what it was going to be. Honestly, I think it was always going to be that. I drove back and slept through the night without waking the first time that had happened in 2 months. 3 days on, Sylvia phoned. Devin had picked up a cash labor position at an unlicensed machine shop on the east side. No oversight, no safety protocols. He'd been drinking. A press took his left hand. I sat in Hank's kitchen after ending the call, both palms pressed flat to the table, and I breathed through it. Then I picked up my keys. I walked into Mercy General Medical Center at 1 a.m, 3rd floor. The chair beside his bed, empty. No flowers. His left hand wrapped and raised, positioned exactly the way mine had been 6 weeks before in another room of that same building. I went to the vending machine in the hall, got 2 coffees, brought them in, dragged the chair up beside him, and sat. Devin's eyes opened. He looked at me the way someone looks when they have long since stopped anticipating anything worth having, and suddenly don't know how to account for its presence. "Dad." His voice came apart. "Drink it before it goes cold," I said, and set the cup on his bedside table. "It's not going to improve, but if you leave it, it gets worse." He looked at the cup, then at me. His eyes went full, and he held my gaze without flinching, without covering it up. We stayed in that room together for over an hour. The conversation stayed small, stayed careful, the way talk goes when both people know they're holding something that won't survive rough handling. When I got up to leave, he said my name. I stopped with my hand on the doorframe. "It's not too late, Devin," I said. That's what I came to say. 4 days later, I mailed a package to his hotel. Inside the work glove, from the night of my accident, washed clean, a brass key to the Northside building and a note in my own hand. The door opens from the inside, son. Always has. On the last morning of December, I turned my key in the front lock of the Northside building as the sun broke over Philadelphia. Inside, one of my volunteers was already posted at a workbench. I caught the ring of a hammer, finding metal clean, deliberate, full of life. I stood in the doorway and let it reach me. It was the best sound I'd heard in a very long time. I didn't set out to win anything. I set out to survive it, and somewhere along the way, surviving became something closer to living again. Looking back now, what this cost me isn't something I can put a number on. It cost me the version of my son I had spent decades believing in. It cost me years of quiet I will never get back. But what it taught me, I believe God puts certain moments in front of you, not to break you, but to show you what you are actually made of. The timing felt cruel while I was inside it. Looking back, it was exact. If you've been following these grandpa revenge stories or the father stories that find their way to this channel, then, this one wasn't really about revenge at all. It was about a man who refused to let what was done to him define what he would do next. Here is what I would tell anyone carrying something like this. Move quietly. The person who stays calm and builds their case will outlast the one who makes noise. Protect what is yours before the threat shows itself. By the time you can see it clearly, it is often already in motion. If you still have something to give, give it. The 5 million didn't make me whole. Signing it away did. Leave the door open even when everything in you wants to close it for good. Not for their sake, for yours. If any of that landed with you today, leave a comment and tell me what stayed with you. And if you know someone who is fighting a quiet battle right now, a father, a grandfather, anyone who needs to be reminded that integrity still wins, share this story with them. And if you haven't already subscribed to Grandpa's Revenge, there is more to come. Thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next one.